Like it like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey yo, listen.
What you want?
Drop it low to the flow. Oh,
Like it like that.
Yeah.
oh. Are you ready for this?
All right, so are you ready to go deep on this one? Can Africa really become a global economic powerhouse? I mean, it's a question we hear a lot these days.
Yeah.
And, you sent me a ton of reports and articles and analyses
Oh, I did.
to get ready for this deep dive.
Yeah.
So let's unpack it, right?
Let's do it.
What's the story here?
Yeah.
What do people need to be paying attention to? It is fascinating, though, right?
Absolutely.
This is the continent with the youngest population on the planet.
Yeah.
Median age, just 19.
That's right.
But at the same time, they're wrestling with serious poverty and debt issues.
Yeah, it is a fascinating paradox.
Right.
We often hear about Africa's demographic dividend,
Right.
this massive potential workforce.
Huge potential.
But turning that potential into reality, I mean, it's not automatic.
No guarantees.
No.
So I'm seeing that a lot of these reports are highlighting, Africa's vast natural resources.
Of course.
I mean, we're talking 30% of the world's mineral reserves, 60% of the arable land.
Absolutely. And you can't forget the massive potential for renewable energy, too.
Oh, yeah.
Solar hydropower Africa could be a global leader in this space.
Yeah.
But resources alone don't guarantee success. I mean, look, we've seen the resource curse play out too many times.
Unfortunately.
Countries that are rich in natural resources, but they fail to translate that wealth into broad-based prosperity.
Yeah, it's not a simple equation. You just can't plug it in.
Nope.
So some of the sources I've been looking at are really excited about the tech innovation that's already happening.
Yeah,
M-Pesa, for example, revolutionized mobile money in Kenya.
for sure.
And, we're seeing places like Lagos, Nairobi, Cape Town. These are becoming vibrant tech hubs.
Absolutely.
But then you see these reports that highlight the massive infrastructure gaps
Oh, yeah.
holding the continent back.
Huge.
600 million people without electricity,
It's a lot.
poor transportation networks, limited digital connectivity.
Yeah.
I mean, that has to be a major drag on growth.
It is. It really is.
Yeah.
It's like trying to build a high-tech economy on a foundation of sand.
Ooh, I like that.
And then you layer on top of that the governance issues.
Right.
Corruption, political instability, weak institutions.
Yeah.
These create huge uncertainty for investors.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, investors get spooked, and they should.
Of course.
Then there's the debt.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, many African nations are trapped in this cycle of unsustainable debt, right?
Right.
40% of sub-Saharan Africa is considered to be in debt distress,
It's a lot.
and they're relying on these exports of raw materials.
Yeah.
But those prices are so volatile.
They are.
It just makes the whole situation more precarious.
Exactly. It's a dangerous combination. So
Yeah.
you've got this incredible potential,
Sure.
but these really serious obstacles.
Yeah, so what's been jumping out at you from the regional examples? Well, I'm seeing a lot of buzz about East Africa.
Yeah,
Kenya's tech scene seems to be exploding.
it is.
Ethiopia and Tanzania also making moves. I have to admit, I was surprised by how much positive coverage there was about Rwanda.
Oh, yeah,
They've made incredible progress since the genocide in the 90s,
they have.
going from devastation to one of the fastest growing economies in Africa.
It's amazing.
It is amazing.
Rwanda is a fascinating case study.
It is.
They've really prioritized good governance,
Yeah.
investing heavily in education and infrastructure,
Yeah.
attracting foreign investment.
Right.
Shows that strong leadership
Yeah.
and a focus on long-term development can make a real difference.
Yeah. Okay, so Rwanda is definitely on my watch list now.
It should be.
In West Africa, I'm seeing a lot about Nigeria,
Yeah,
which makes sense.
makes sense.
Africa's largest economy.
Yes.
But they seem to be stuck in this boom and bust cycle with oil.
It's a challenge.
Are they making any progress on diversifying their economy?
They are trying.
Okay.
There's a growing focus on sectors like agriculture, manufacturing,
Okay.
and services,
Good.
but it's a slow process.
Yeah.
Ghana, on the other hand, seems to be having more success with attracting foreign investment.
Yeah.
Interesting, thanks in part to their stable political environment.
That's good.
Yeah.
And what about North Africa?
Mm.
I know Egypt is undertaking some massive infrastructure projects,
Yes.
like the new administrative capital.
Uh-huh.
But is that really going to translate into broad-based economic growth?
It's too early to say.
Okay.
Mega projects can be risky,
Yeah.
and they don't always deliver the promised benefits.
I've heard that.
Morocco, on the other hand,
Yeah.
is taking a more diversified approach,
Okay.
focusing on renewable energy,
Uh-huh.
tourism,
Okay.
manufacturing.
Got it.
They're also trying to position themselves as a gateway to the rest of Africa.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What about Southern Africa? South Africa seems to be struggling with a lot of internal challenges,
They are.
but is it still the economic powerhouse of the region?
It is.
Okay.
But its dominance is definitely being challenged. Botswana is often cited as a model for good governance
Right.
and economic stability,
Okay.
while countries like Angola and Mozambique are trying to leverage their vast natural resources,
Yeah.
particularly oil and gas.
So a real mix of opportunities and challenges across the different regions.
Absolutely.
But how does this all connect to the bigger picture?
That's the question.
Can these individual successes really translate into Africa becoming a major player on the global economic stage?
Yeah, that's the key question.
Right.
You know, we need to consider those external factors too.
What do you mean?
The things that will shape Africa's future, things like climate change,
Uh-huh.
which is already having a devastating impact on the continent,
Right.
and global competition,
Right.
which is only getting fiercer.
Oh, yeah. It's a tough world out there.
It is.
And of course, we can't forget about China
Yeah, you can't.
and China's growing influence in Africa.
It's significant.
Some see it as a positive force, right? Bringing much-needed investment, while others worry about debt traps and exploitation.
Right. There are both sides to that coin.
There are.
Yeah, that's a discussion we'll definitely need to delve into.
Absolutely. So we've laid out the strengths, the challenges, the regional dynamics.
Yeah.
Now let's get into those concrete steps that Africa can take to unlock its full potential.
Let's do it.
I'm seeing a lot of these reports emphasizing the need to invest in human capital.
Right. It all starts with education.
Of course.
But it's not just about basic literacy anymore. It's
Oh.
about equipping Africa's youth with the skills they need for the 21st century economy.
Right.
STEM fields, digital literacy, vocational training, and of course, healthcare.
Makes sense. You need a healthy and educated workforce to drive economic growth.
Absolutely.
But I also keep seeing these reports hammering on the importance of infrastructure.
Absolutely. Infrastructure is the backbone of any modern economy.
For sure.
We're talking expanding energy access,
Yeah.
especially through renewable sources,
Got it.
building efficient transportation networks, and boosting broadband connectivity.
And while we're at it,
Yeah.
let's not forget about good governance.
No, you can't.
These reports are pretty unanimous on that point.
For sure.
Tackling corruption, strengthening institutions, ensuring policy stability. These are essential for creating a business environment that attracts investment and fosters sustainable growth.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, it's about building trust,
Absolutely.
both within Africa and with international partners.
Both.
Okay, so we've got education,
Uh-huh.
infrastructure, governance.
Yep.
But I'm also seeing a lot of buzz about the potential of the African Continental Free Trade Area,
Oh, yeah.
or AfCFTA, as it's known.
That's a game changer.
Really?
Imagine a single market of 1.3 billion people
Wow.
with reduced trade barriers,
Uh-huh.
streamlined regulations,
Okay.
and improved cross-border infrastructure.
That's huge.
The potential for economic integration and growth is enormous.
But of course there are challenges.
Of course.
Getting 54 countries to agree on anything is never easy.
It's a challenge.
And there are bound to be winners and losers in any trade agreement,
There are.
right? And then there's the question of implementation.
Yeah.
Building the necessary infrastructure, harmonizing regulations, ensuring equitable distribution of benefits. These are all complex tasks.
They are.
So AfCFTA is a big bet,
It is.
but one with potentially huge payoffs if they can make it work.
Absolutely.
And then there's this whole question of climate change.
Oh, yeah.
How can Africa develop sustainably
Right.
in a world that's facing increasingly severe climate impacts?
That's perhaps the biggest challenge of all.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just about adapting to a changing climate. It's
Yeah.
about leveraging the opportunities
Okay.
that the green transition presents.
Interesting. So I'm seeing a lot of interest in Africa's potential as a leader in renewable energy.
It makes sense.
They have the resources, right?
They do.
Sun, wind, hydropower,
Uh-huh.
and the need to leapfrog over fossil fuels. But can they attract the investment and build the infrastructure needed to make that vision a reality?
That's a question we'll need to explore further.
We'll have to.
Yeah,
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
we have.
We've talked about the potential, the challenges,
Yeah.
the regional dynamics,
Yeah.
the key pathways to growth.
Uh-huh.
Now let's get into some specific examples.
Okay, let's look at what's happening on the ground
Yeah.
and see how these ideas are playing out
Yeah.
in real-world contexts.
Sounds good. One country that keeps popping up in these sources is Rwanda.
Ah, Rwanda.
Yeah,
They've been hailed as a model for development.
that's what I'm hearing.
But is their success replicable elsewhere?
Good question.
Let's dive in and find out.
Let's do it.
So Rwanda's story is really fascinating.
Yeah.
You know, they've achieved impressive economic growth,
I've heard that.
averaging over 7% annually for the past 2 decades.
Wow.
But, you know, it's important to note that their approach has been very centralized,
Yeah.
with a strong emphasis on government control and planning.
Yeah, that definitely seems to be a point of debate in these sources.
Uh-huh.
Some argue that this top-down approach has been key to Rwanda's success,
Right.
allowing them to make quick decisions and implement policies efficiently.
Uh-huh.
But others worry about the lack of democratic space
Yeah.
and the potential for corruption
Sure.
when you have so much power concentrated in the hands of a few.
It's a valid concern.
It is.
And it raises the question of, you know, is this model of development sustainable in the long term?
Yeah.
Can you maintain those high growth rates without eventually opening up more political and economic freedoms?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
It's interesting to compare Rwanda with Ghana,
Okay.
which is often cited as a model for democratic governance in Africa.
Right.
They haven't achieved quite the same level of economic growth,
That's true.
but they've created a more stable and inclusive political system.
And that can be a major advantage in attracting foreign investment. Investors are looking for predictability and stability,
Makes sense.
and Ghana seems to offer that in spades.
Yeah.
They've also been very strategic in focusing on sectors like manufacturing and services,
Right.
trying to, you know, move up the value chain, diversify their economy beyond just cocoa and gold.
Yeah, I see that mentioned in a couple of the reports you sent.
Yeah.
It seems like there's this growing recognition
Mm.
that Africa needs to shift away from this traditional model
What do you mean?
of simply exporting raw materials
Uh-huh.
and move towards developing more sophisticated industries
Yeah.
that create higher paying jobs and generate more value within the continent.
Absolutely. It's about moving up the value chain, capturing a larger share of the profits from Africa's resources,
Right.
and building a more resilient and sustainable economy.
Makes sense, but it's not easy.
No, it's not.
Right.
It requires investments in education, infrastructure, and technology,
Of course.
as well as supportive policies that encourage entrepreneurship and innovation.
And probably a good dose of patience too, right?
Definitely.
And these kinds of structural transformations don't happen overnight.
It's a long-term process.
Mm.
There are some encouraging signs.
Oh, yeah. What are you seeing?
We're seeing a growing number of African countries adopting policies aimed at promoting industrialization and diversification.
Okay.
And there's a real sense of optimism
Okay.
among young entrepreneurs and innovators who are driving the growth of tech hubs across the continent.
You mentioned tech hubs.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Kenya.
Okay.
They've really embraced the digital revolution
Yeah.
and created this vibrant tech ecosystem.
It's very cool.
But is it just hype or is there real substance behind it?
There's definitely substance.
Okay.
Kenya has a young, tech-savvy population,
Right.
a relatively well-developed infrastructure,
Uh-huh.
and a government that's been supportive of the tech sector.
Okay.
They've also benefited from investments by major global tech companies like Google and Microsoft.
Yeah, and M-Pesa, their mobile money platform,
Huge.
has been a huge success story.
It has been.
It's really transformed the way people access financial services in Kenya and beyond.
It's really interesting.
That's a great example of how Africa can leapfrog ahead
Yeah.
in certain areas, right?
Right.
Using technology to bypass traditional infrastructure
Yeah.
and solve real-world problems.
Absolutely. And it's not just Kenya.
No.
We're seeing similar innovation hubs emerging across Africa,
Where else?
from Lagos to Cape Town to
Hmm.
Kigali. There's a real sense that something special is happening.
Yeah.
A kind of African tech renaissance.
I like that.
But of course,
Uh-oh.
there are challenges,
Always.
right? Like access to funding.
Yeah, that's always a big one.
A lot of these startups struggle to get the capital they need to scale up their operations and compete on a global level.
Makes sense.
And then there's the issue of brain drain.
Oh, yeah.
Some of Africa's brightest minds are still being lured away to work in Silicon Valley or other tech hubs in developed countries.
Yeah, it's hard to compete with that.
It is. Those are real concerns.
AR.
But there are also efforts to address them.
Oh, good. What are they doing?
You know, we're seeing a growing number of venture capital funds investing in African startups.
Okay.
And there's a growing recognition that retaining talent
Right.
is crucial for Africa's long-term economic success.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so tech is a potential bright spot,
It is,
but there's still a lot of work to be done.
for sure.
What about the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA?
Right.
It's been touted as this potential game changer.
Big time.
But is it really living up to the hype?
Well, it's still early days.
Yeah.
AfCFTA only came into effect in 2021.
That recently.
Yeah, and it's going to take time to fully implement it
Right.
and for the benefits to really materialize.
Yeah.
But the potential is huge.
Yep.
Imagine a single market of 1.3 billion people
Wow.
with reduced tariffs, streamlined customs procedures.
That would be amazing.
It could boost intra-African trade,
Right?
attract foreign investment, and create new opportunities for businesses across the continent.
Yeah, I see these reports projecting that AfCFTA could boost Africa's GDP by trillions of dollars in the coming decades.
It's possible.
But, as we discussed earlier,
Yeah,
there are also significant challenges.
for sure.
Getting 54 countries
Right.
with different economic structures
Yeah.
and political priorities to work together is no easy feat.
It's a challenge.
It is.
Exactly. It requires a lot of coordination, compromise, and political will.
Yeah,
And there are bound to be some bumps along the way.
for sure.
You know, some countries might benefit more than others.
Right.
And there's a risk that certain industries or communities could be left behind.
That seems to be a recurring theme, right?
It does.
This tension between the potential for economic growth
Uh-huh.
and the need to ensure that growth is inclusive
Yeah.
and benefits everyone.
Yeah. How do you balance those competing priorities?
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It's a complex question.
Right.
There's no easy answer.
Yeah.
But I think the key is to focus on investing in human capital,
Okay.
building strong institutions, and
Mhm.
creating a level playing field
Makes sense.
that allows everyone to participate in the economy
Right.
and share in the benefits of growth.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of internal factors
We have.
that will shape Africa's economic future,
Uh-huh.
but we can't ignore the external influences.
Of course not.
I'm thinking specifically about China's growing presence in Africa.
Yes, China.
Yeah.
It's a topic that generates a lot of debate.
For sure.
Some view China as a valuable partner,
Uh-huh.
providing much-needed investment and expertise.
Right.
Others see it as a neo-colonial power,
Right.
extracting resources
Yeah.
and saddling African countries with unsustainable debt.
So I'm seeing both perspectives reflected in these reports.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have examples of Chinese-funded infrastructure projects
Right.
that have been transformative roads, railways, ports, power plants.
Yeah.
These are things that African countries desperately need
They do.
to develop their economies and improve the lives of their people.
Yeah, and China is often willing to invest in projects
Right.
that Western countries shy away from,
Right.
either because they're too risky
Right.
or because they don't align with their strategic interests.
Interesting. So they're filling a gap.
Yeah.
But then you have the concerns about debt traps
Right.
with some African countries taking on these massive loans from China
Mm-hmm.
that they may struggle to repay.
Yeah. And there are questions about transparency and accountability.
Sure.
Are these projects really benefiting African countries?
Yeah.
Or are they primarily serving Chinese interests?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
It's important to remember that China's involvement in Africa is not monolithic.
It's not.
There are a variety of Chinese actors operating on the continent.
Right. State-owned enterprises, private companies, NGOs, each with their own motivations and objectives.
Exactly.
So it's a complicated picture.
It is.
It sounds like African countries need to be very strategic in their engagement with China,
I think so.
carefully weighing the potential benefits against the risks.
Absolutely. It's about negotiating favorable terms,
Yeah.
ensuring that projects are aligned with their own development priorities,
Okay.
and building the capacity to manage these complex relationships.
And that probably applies to their relationships with all external partners, right?
It does.
Whether it's China,
Uh-huh.
the U.S., Europe, or anyone else.
Right.
African countries need to be assertive
They do.
and make sure their voices are heard.
Yeah.
It's about taking ownership of their own development and charting their own course.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
You know, it's about moving beyond the old donor-recipient dynamic
Uh-huh.
and forging partnerships that are truly mutually beneficial.
Right.
And that requires building strong institutions, investing in human capital, and promoting good governance.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've looked at the internal and external factors that will shape Africa's economic future, from demographics to technology to geopolitics.
The whole lot.
We've explored different models of development, from Rwanda's centralized approach to Ghana's focus on democratic governance.
Right.
And we've delved into the complexities of China's growing influence in Africa.
Deep dive.
But there's one more crucial element we need to discuss before we wrap up.
What's that?
And that's the role of critical minerals.
Ah, yes. The elephant in the room.
Right.
Because our sources make it clear.
Uh-huh.
Africa is sitting on a treasure trove of critical minerals.
Okay.
Cobalt, lithium, manganese, graphite, essential for the global green energy transition.
Wow.
This could be a huge opportunity for Africa to leverage its natural resources to drive economic development.
And position itself as a key player in the global green economy.
Yeah, but can they avoid the resource curse this time?
That's the question.
We've seen it happen time and again.
Right.
A country discovers valuable resources.
Yeah.
But instead of benefiting the entire population, it just ends up enriching a small elite,
Right.
leading to corruption and even conflict.
Yeah. It's a trap Africa can't afford to fall into.
It can't. So how do we do that? What are some concrete steps that African countries can take to avoid the resource curse and ensure that these critical minerals are a force for good?
Well, I think it starts with transparency and accountability.
Okay.
You know, we need to know who's benefiting from these mining operations,
Right.
how much revenue is being generated, and where that money is going.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I imagine environmental regulations are going to be crucial too.
Oh, absolutely.
We can't repeat the mistakes of the past,
No.
where extractive industries have often left behind a trail of environmental damage and social disruption.
Right. It's about balancing economic development with environmental protection and social justice.
Yeah.
And it's about involving local communities in the decision-making process,
Okay.
ensuring that they have a voice in how these resources are managed, and that they benefit from the revenues generated.
Okay, so transparency, accountability, environmental safeguards, community involvement.
Yeah.
Those all sound like key ingredients for avoiding the resource curse
They are.
and creating a more sustainable and equitable model of development.
Yeah. Are there any specific examples?
Yeah. Are there any countries that are doing this well?
There are a few. Botswana is often cited as a model
Oh, really?
for how to manage mineral wealth responsibly.
Okay.
They've invested heavily in education and infrastructure,
Okay.
and they've negotiated favorable deals with mining companies
Good.
that ensure a fair share of the revenues flows back to the government and benefits the population.
So Botswana is one to watch. Any others?
Rwanda is also making strides in developing a more sustainable mining sector, focusing on attracting responsible investors
Okay.
and building a value chain that extends beyond just extracting raw materials.
Okay.
They're trying to position themselves as a hub for processing and refining minerals,
Interesting.
which would create more jobs and generate more revenue within the country.
That's a smart strategy.
It is.
It seems like there's this growing recognition that Africa needs to move up the value chain,
Yeah.
not just be a source of raw materials for the rest of the world.
Absolutely.
But that requires investment in technology and infrastructure.
It does.
And it also requires building the capacity to compete on a global level.
Exactly. It's not going to be easy,
No, I imagine not.
but the potential rewards are enormous.
They are.
Imagine an Africa that's not just a supplier of raw materials, but a global leader in green technologies, manufacturing, and innovation.
That's a vision worth striving for.
It is.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this episode.
A lot.
We've explored Africa's incredible potential,
Huge.
the formidable challenges it faces,
Yeah, definitely.
and the diverse pathways it could take in the coming decades.
So many possibilities.
We've seen how demographics, resources, technology, governance, trade, and global partnerships are all intertwined
They are,
in shaping Africa's economic trajectory.
for sure.
It's a complex
It is.
and constantly evolving story.
Yeah,
One that's full of both promise and peril.
absolutely.
But one thing is clear. Africa's future is not predetermined.
That's right.
It's being written right now
As we speak.
by the actions and decisions of its people, its leaders, and its global partners.
And that's what makes it so fascinating to watch.
It is.
So what are your thoughts? What
Yeah.
stood out to you from all the material you've been reading?
I'll be honest, it's kind of been like a roller coaster ride for me.
Oh, yeah.
On one hand, you see all this incredible potential,
Right.
the young population, the vast resources, that entrepreneurial energy.
Yeah,
But then you kind of realize the scale of the challenges too.
of course.
Poverty, inequality, climate change,
Big one.
political instability.
Yeah.
It's a lot to process.
It is, and it's easy to get caught up in, either the Africa Rising narrative
Right.
or the doom and gloom scenario.
Yeah.
But the reality, as always, is much more nuanced.
It always is. I think what struck me most is that Africa's future isn't predetermined.
Right.
It's not a given that they'll either become this global economic powerhouse
Yeah.
or fall further behind.
Right.
It really depends on the choices that they make in the coming years.
Oh, they have agency.
They do, and it also depends on the choices that we make as global citizens
Absolutely.
in terms of how we engage with Africa.
I think that's a crucial point.
Yeah.
Africa's destiny isn't simply a matter of internal dynamics.
Right.
It's also shaped by these external forces.
Like what?
Trade policies, investment flows, geopolitical alliances,
Uh-huh.
and, of course, climate change.
Right. And speaking of those external forces,
Yeah.
one thing that keeps coming up in these sources is the role of development aid. Is it helping or is it hindering Africa's progress?
That's another one of those complex and often contentious issues.
Yeah.
On the one hand, aid has undoubtedly played a role in alleviating poverty, improving health outcomes, and supporting education in Africa.
Okay. But there's
Yeah.
also this growing recognition that the traditional aid models
Yeah.
haven't always been effective.
No, they haven't.
I'm seeing some of these reports arguing that aid can create dependency,
Mm-hmm.
distort local markets,
Yeah,
undermine that local ownership of development initiatives.
exactly. And there's been a real push in recent years to move away from those traditional aid models
Okay.
towards more sustainable approaches
Like what?
that focus on building capacity, promoting trade, and fostering private sector investment.
So it's about empowering African countries to take control of their own development, rather than just relying on handouts.
Exactly. And I think that's a theme that runs through a lot of these discussions we've been having,
What do you mean?
whether it's trade or investment
Yeah.
or development aid.
Mm-hmm.
The key is for African countries to be in the driver's seat,
Right.
setting their own priorities and shaping their own destiny.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've covered so much ground here.
Okay.
Explored all these different facets of this complex question. But I want to come back to the question we started with.
Okay.
Can Africa really become a global economic powerhouse?
Right.
What are your final thoughts on that?
I think the answer is a qualified yes.
Qualified.
The potential is definitely there.
Okay.
Africa has the resources, the human capital, and the entrepreneurial spirit to become a major force in the global economy.
Good.
But it's not going to be easy.
What are the biggest obstacles they need to overcome?
I think the biggest internal challenges are
Sure.
governance, corruption, and conflict.
Those are big ones.
They're issues that have plagued the continent for decades,
Yeah.
and they continue to undermine economic progress.
Right. And externally.
Externally, the biggest challenges are climate change, unfair trade practices, and lack of access to global markets.
So it's a combination of internal and external factors that need to be addressed
Yes.
to really see that success.
Yeah, and it's going to require this concerted effort
From
from African governments, civil society, the private sector, and yes, the international community
right.
to create the conditions for sustainable and inclusive growth.
That sounds like a really daunting task.
It is, but it's also an incredibly exciting time to be watching Africa.
In what way?
There's so much energy,
Yeah.
so much creativity,
Yeah.
so much potential.
All right.
And if they can get it right,
Yeah.
the benefits will be felt not just in Africa, but around the world.
That's a great point. Africa's success isn't just in Africa's interest.
It's not.
It's in everyone's interest.
Absolutely.
A more prosperous and stable Africa would be a boon for the global economy, a source of innovation and growth,
Mm-hmm.
and just a more peaceful and equitable world.
I couldn't agree more.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
we'll leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Okay. Hit me.
Given everything that we've discussed,
Mm-hmm.
if you were an investor,
Yeah.
what would you be most excited about in Africa right now? And what would make you hesitate?
Good questions.
Yeah, keep those questions in mind as you continue to follow Africa's journey, because this is a story that's just getting started.
Are you ready for this?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Like it like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey yo, listen.
What you want?
Drop it low to the flow. Oh, oh.
Like it like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.